All right, so this is going to be another movie review. This one's called Jane Eyre, 1943. I'm giving this 5 out of 5 stars. I love this flick. Joan Fontaine is hot, hot. Jane Eyre is a 1943 U.S. film adoption of Charlotte Bronte's 1847 novel of the same name, released by 20th Century Fox. Very romantic movie. I knew nothing about Jane Eyre. There have been tons of movies about this book, and still nothing. I was directed by Robert Stevenson, who also did Mary Poppins. It was produced by the uncredited Kenneth McGowan and Orson Welles. Welles also stars in the film as Edward Rochester, with Joan Fontaine playing the title character. Pretty cool black and white flick. I was impressed. I should save my video details before I leave. The screenplay was written by John Houseman, Aldous Huxley, and director Robert Stevenson. The musical score was composed and conducted by Bernard Herrmann, and the cinematography was by George Barnes. I've never read Jane Eyre. I've never seen another Jane Eyre movie. But I'm sure there must be tons out there. This is probably the creme de la creme right here, based on what I've read in other reviews on IMDb. Production company 20th Century Fox. I posted a link to the free movie as well as the trailer. I'm guessing it's public domain now. I have no idea. Release dates December 24th, 1943 in the UK and February 4th, 1944 in the US. Running time 97 minutes, country United States, language English, budget 1.705 million, and a box office of 1.75 million. In rentals, 2,620,527 admissions in France, 1946. So not much of a financial success, but I guess we'll get into it, the economics later on. So rentals, yeah, it may have turned a profit. That I'm not sure about. Orphaned, unloved, and unwanted 10-year-old Jane Eyre lives with her cruel, selfish, uncaring maternal aunt via marriage. Mrs. Reed of Gateshead Hall and her spoiled bowling son. Jane is ecstatic when Mrs. Reed, eager to get rid of her, arranges for Jane to be sent to Lowood Institution, a charity boarding school for young girls run by the disciplinarian Mr. Bucklehurst. She needs discipline. But once she gets to the boarding school, she turns into lesbian foo with her girlfriend, her 10-year-old girlfriend, Helen Burns, based on what Mrs. Reed had told him. Mr. Bucklehurst labels Jane a liar in front of her schoolmates, and Bucklehurst orders her to stand on a stool for hours on her first day of attendance. So this is like a Fanny and Alexander type discipline. She is comforted and befriended by another student, Helen Burns. This is the prepubescent lesbian foo going on here. Later, Jane protests when Bucklehurst orders that Helen's naturally curling hair be cut. How dare you look like Shirley Temple? Both are punished by being forced to walk circles in a courtyard during a downpour. That's pretty cool penance. How come I never got that when I was in school? Dr. Rivers, a sympathetic physician who periodically checks on the student, brings the girls inside, but it's too late for Helen, who dies that night. Of course, Bucklehurst has no shame. He wants to turn Jane into a school teacher 10 years later in 1840. 20-year-old Jane, very comely looking Joan Fontaine, turns down Brocklehurst's offer of a teaching position. She advertises for and she accepts as governess for a young girl named Adele. Oui, oui. When Jane arrives at Thornfield, a gloomily isolated mansion, here we go into the Gothic horror element. This is very much a Gothic soap opera in the same vein as Dark Shadows. It reminded me a lot of Dark Shadows. I thought I was watching Victoria Winters here. But here we have Jane, aka Joan Fontaine. She initially thinks her employer is Mrs. Fairfax, who is in fact the housekeeper for the absent master. Jane goes for a walk one night in the foggy moors, only to startle a horse into throwing and slightly injuring its rider, Edward Rochester, who she doesn't realize is her employer. When Jane arrives back at Thornfield, she discovers this fact, and Rochester calls her into his library to interview her. His brusque manner contrasts with her quiet, gentle demeanor, and he finally dismisses her with the wish that she will enjoy her stay there. She's already buttering him up. That night, Jane is awakened by strange laughter. Yeah, sound like Will Clark cackling. She investigates and she discovers that Rochester's bed curtains are on fire. She rouses the sleeping man and they extinguish the fire without rousing anyone. Rochester bids her wait while he goes to another wing of the house where mysterious seamstress Grace Poole keeps to herself. When he returns, he tells Jane nothing other than that the matter is under control. The next morning, he leaves Thornfield. A winter and spring go by before a large group of guests. Jane is greatly saddened when Mrs. Fairfax discloses that everyone expects Rochester to marry the vivacious and snobbish Blanche Ingram, played by Agnes Moorhead. She doesn't look at all like Tabitha's mother. However, Rochester confides to Jane his conviction that Blanche is attracted only by his wealth. When a man named Richard Mason of Spanish Town, Jamaica, arrives at Thornfield, Jane sees that Rochester is disturbed. That night, a panicked scream awakens everyone. Rochester assures his guest it is just a servant's reaction to a nightmare. But after he sends them back to their rooms, he has Jane secretly tend to a bleeding Mason in the tower while he fetches a doctor. Behind her, a locked wooden door rattles with someone trying to get out, but Rochester orders Jane to ignore everything she sees or hears. Rochester has the doctor take Mason away. Rochester has a private conversation with Blanche in which he bluntly asserts that she is a gold digger. Keep away from him. Offended. That's Tabitha's mother. Offended, she and the others leave. Unaware of this development, Jane broaches the topic of her future employment elsewhere after Rochester gets married, and she confesses that she doesn't want to leave Rochester. In response, Rochester reveals that he loves her and not Blanche. He proposes to marry her, which she accepts. Bad decision. During the wedding ceremony, an attorney intervenes, declares that Rochester has a wife by the name of Bertha Antonietta Mason, who is mentally ill and deranged. This is confirmed by Mason, Rochester's brother-in-law. Rochester calls off the marriage ceremony. Rochester takes Jane and Mason back to Thornfield to reveal Bertha, who's insane to the point of animalistic behavior, and she lives in a tower cell guarded by Grace Poole. Rochester explains to Jane that his and Bertha's marriage was arranged when he was a teenager, and he did not truly know her. He was helpless as she drove herself mad, and he has been searching for happiness with the real partner ever since, which caused him to become desperate when he fell for Jane. Be sleazy, playa. Be sleazy. Though they admit they still love each other, Jane rejects Rochester's offer to stay as his mistress, and she determinedly departs Thornfield to preserve her principles. Oh, isn't that nice? She'll be back, don't worry. With her funds exhausted, Jane becomes homeless. Then she returns to Gateshead. She discovers that her aunt has suffered a stroke caused by worry over the ruinous gambling habits of her son, who it is revealed has committed suicide. Huh. There's tragedy all around here. Mrs. Reed is happy to see Jane and they reconcile. After Mrs. Reed dies, Jane ponders what to do next, even consider working for Mr. Brocklehurst, when she hears Rochester's anguished voice calling her name during a storm. Jane returns to Thornfield and she finds it in ruins. Mrs. Fairfax informs her that Bertha had escaped confinement. Bertha set the place on fire, and Bertha fled to the roof. While Fairfax took Adele to safety, Rochester tried to rescue Bertha, but she jumped to her death. The burning staircase collapsed underneath Rochester, badly wounding him. With no other impediments, Jane reunites with Rochester, who is now blind from the fire. He tells her she should not waste her life with a crippled man like him, but she has made her choice to stay. Oh, isn't that romantic? They reaffirm their love and they kiss passionately. What a nice redemption story that was. I enjoyed every minute of it. Development under David O. Selznick. David O. Selznick hired John Houseman in February 1941 while Houseman was directing Philip Barry's play Liberty Bell. Houseman's first assignment for the producer would be writing the script to Jane Eyre. Houseman later said, I foolishly believed I would then produce the film because Selznick had just made Gone with the Wind and Rebecca, a movie which Joan Fontaine received an Oscar. And I believe he was going to take a rest from producing for a while, and he was going to let me do the producing for his studio. This was one of the reasons I went to work for him, but I didn't know David Selznick. It was absolutely out of the question that he would dream of letting anybody else do anything. Houseman says he started work on the screenplay during rehearsals for the Mercury Theater's Broadway production of Native Son. Robert Stevenson, a British director Selznick had under contract, was sent to New York City to work with them. After the play's March 24th premiere, Houseman and Stevenson flew to the West Coast and they completed the screenplay over the next 5 weeks. According to Houseman, Stevenson did most of the work. We finished it and we presented it to our leader, only to discover that he had not the slightest intention of producing it, Houseman wrote. Aldous Huxley also contributed to the screenplay, rendering the character of Mrs. Rochester unseen, assuring that she would be more menacing, and circumventing British censorship regulations on the depiction of madness. Other contributors to the script include Dwight Boyden and playwright Keith Winter. So we got to give Robert Stevenson some recognition for the screenplay. All right. Bam! Nice. Houseman, who had nothing to do with producing the final film, said he was unhappy when he saw the movie and he asked for his name to be removed. His credit stayed. Under 20th Century Fox Selznick executive Daniel O'Shea began to offer the production as a package, mandating the services of director Stevenson, star Joan Fontaine, architect William Pereira as production designer, and cinematographer George Barnes for it to go into production. The price was so fabulous, according to Houseman, that it took a year to find a buyer. In the midst of the war boom in November 1942, what is a war boom? Wasting money on bombs? Selznick finally sold the package to William Getz at 20th Century Fox, which Getz was running in the absence of Darrell F. Zanuck. It was an ambitious overall deal where Selznick sold the rights to several projects and talent contracted to him he attached. Other film projects included The Keys of the Kingdom and Claudia, as well as talent contracts with Stevenson, Alfred Hitchcock, Dorothy McGuire, George Barnes, Stanley Cortez, Gene Kelly, Alan Marshall, Ingrid Bergman, and Joan Fontaine. Of the projects sold, Jane Eyre was the closest to being released, but Selznick had been frustrated by his inability to get the right leading man under Orson Welles. Selznick had always wanted Orson Welles to play the role of Edward Rochester, but Selznick despaired over getting him because of his contract with RKO Pictures. When Welles was signed for Jane Eyre in December 1942, he was no longer with RKO, and Welles was eager to earn money to purchase, develop, and cut the footage he had shot for It's All True, an ill-fated project for the U.S. government for which he had received no payment. He hired himself out as an actor, the first of many times that Welles would support projects by acting in more conventional films. Welles was also struggling to retain his place in Hollywood as a producer, and he negotiated a role as the associate producer of Jane Eyre, as well as top billing. He was paid $100,000, the same amount he received for his multiple responsibilities in Citizen Kane. Welles had already adopted Jane Eyre twice for radio. The Mercury Theater on the Air broadcast September 18, 1938 as lost because Welles used the same acetate original to prepare the film, and the recording was irreparably damaged. In early 1942, Selznick wrote Getz that he and Welles agreed on the importance of casting character actors who were new to motion pictures. He offered to be present at the casting meeting, and he asked that Welles be there as well, because I know few people in the history of the business who have shown such a talent for exact casting and for digging up new people. Mercury Theater players from the stage and radio who appear in Jane Eyre include Agnes Moorhead, Eskene Sanford, Eustace Wyatt, and Edith Barrett, but the character roles generally went to familiar Hollywood performers, many of them with British stage credits. With the schedule finalized, Welles ended his run on Ceiling Unlimited, a CBS radio series created to glorify the aviation industry and dramatize its role in World War II. Well, of course, Welles is a warmonger. He loved FDR. On February 1st, 1943, he probably hated Nazism too. For 13 episodes, he had written, produced, and narrated this show, and his work was considered a prime contribution to the war effort, wrote the Museum of Broadcasting. Oh, good old patriotic Orson Welles. He ate too much Burger King, and he played Omnitron or whatever. He closed his final episode stating to the audience, "For a while, the Mercury Theater is going off the air. Next week, my friend Ronald Coleman will tell you the story about the Douglas Dauntless, the world's greatest dive bomber. We very much wish it were possible to go on writing and producing these radio plays. We have never been happier. We leave with real regret." Welles and Selznick persuaded 20th Century Fox to hire Bernard Herrmann to compose the score for Jane Eyre. When the film's co-producer with Welles, Kenneth McGowan, asked Herrmann, what work he had done before, the composer angrily replied, "Well, I never heard of you either." Herman based a score for Jane Eyre on the score he had written for Rebecca, December 9th, 1938, the first episode of Wells' radio series, The Campbell Playhouse. Alfred Newman, head of the Fox music department, admired Herman's work for RKO. Newman gave the rare privilege of conducting his own score, the first of many that Herman wrote for the studio. Jane Eyre was in production from February 3rd until mid-April 1943. On April 8th, the Hollywood Reporter noted that Wells would receive an on-screen credit as associate producer. In an April 17th memo to Getz, which he blind copied to Stevenson, Selznick protested that such a credit would be unfair to the director, who pretty clearly took up the responsibility of producer where it left off. You know as well as I do that Orson is such a personality that if he's credited as a producer, Stevenson's credit is likely to degenerate into something of a stooge status, as has occurred with Norman Foster on Journey into Fear. And mind you, on Journey into Fear, Orson chose not even to have his name appear in connection with the production. 3 months later, in a letter to 20th Century Fox, a Selznick attorney agreed to Wells receiving a producer credit if he wanted it. We have only just learned that Mr. Wells did a great deal more producing on the picture than we had previously known. We have been informed by people from your studio that Mr. Wells worked on the sets, changes in the script and casting, among other things, that he had charge of the editing. I didn't know that Wells was interfering with the editing at this early stage. Although the associate producer credit was stalled in his contract, Wells chose to waive it. Certainly, I did a lot more than a producer ought to, but Stevenson didn't mind that. He later said, adding, "They got along well, very well on the picture, and I don't want to take credit away from him, all of which he deserves. No producer credit appears on the screen or in the Screen Achievement Records Bulletin of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences." Jane Eyre premiered in New York City February 4th, 1944, and in Los Angeles 6 days later, February 10th, 1944. Although the film had its British premiere in late December 1943, it bears a 1944 U.S. copyright in the screen credits and is often considered a 1944 picture. Okay. I watched Dial M for Murder, 1954, last night. I've already reviewed that one. Oh, Adrian's in the chat room. You mentioned Burger King. It's called Hungry Jack's here in Australia. Oh, yeah? Overpriced processed food in Australia. All right, Bosley Crowther of the New York Times, in an ambivalent review called Jane Eyre, a movie film in which no depths of consuming passion are plumbed very diligently, but still spoke of it as grimly fascinating in its own right, with continuous vitality as a romantic horror tale. Yeah, we like romantic horror from the 60s and 70s. Good stuff. We love gothic horror soap opera. There is almost no symbolic resonance and almost no really taking or revealing. Oh, here we go. Wells' ferocious performance was interesting to observe. Yeah, we like Orson Welles' voice on this channel. The voice of Omnicron. Written in The Nation in 1944, critic James Agee stated, there is almost no symbolic resonance and almost no really taking or revealing tension in the film. All you get is a careful and tame production, a sadly vanilla flavored Joan Fontaine, and Wells treating himself to road operatic sculpturings of body, cloak, and diction, his eyes glinting in the Rembrandt gloom at every chance like side orders of jelly. It is possible to enjoy this performance as a deadpan period parody. I imagine he did. Home Media, 1993 Fox Video, VHS. We've got the ISBN number. And then in 2007, 20th Century Fox Home Entertainment Region 1 DVD. Got the UPC number, special features, theatrical trailer and production stills, audio commentary by Joseph McBride and Margaret O'Brien, who played the child in this movie. She was also in Little Women. Audio commentary by Nick Redman, Stephen C. Smith, and Julie Kurgo. Isolated music track, You Know Your Ally Britain, directed by Robert Stevenson. Locked in the Tower, The Men Behind Jane Eyre, 2006. Written and directed by John Cork, with commentary by Scott McIsaac, Simon Callow, Bob Thomas, Hugh Stevenson, Venetia Stevenson, and Ursula Henderson. 2013, we've got Twilight Time Screen Archives Entertainment Blu-ray disc, limited edition of 3,000. November 12th, 2013, includes special features in 2007 DVD release. Critic Glenn Erickson wrote, Bernard Herrmann fans will be interested in the film's isolated M&E music and sound effects track, which makes this disc a dynamite soundtrack experience as well. All right. Dial M for Murder, is that with that's a Hitchcock movie, right? I wasn't too crazy about that. Jane Eyre, 1943, 1 hour, 37 minutes. Gets a whopping 7.4 out of 10 on IMDb, 10,000 ratings. I posted the links to the free movie and the trailer in the description. Highly recommended. Check it out. After a harsh childhood, orphan Jane Eyre is hired by Edward Rochester, the brooding lord of a mysterious manor house, to care for his young daughter. Here's a review from Dahl Russell. Dahl Russell gives it the same rating as I do, 10 out of 10. The title of the review by Dahl Russell on IMDb is The Best Jane Eyre, a Classic. And this review is dated July 23rd, 2006. I've been having a Jane Eyre-a-thon. There are many good versions of this Gothic story of the fight between worldliness and virtue. Many have one really outstanding element, but this version with Orson Welles and Joan Fontaine remains overall the best. Like most, it eliminates most of the second half of the book, which is the really important part for Bronte, who is one of the finest religious thinkers of her age. There are so many bests in this version. It will always be hard to top for getting Bronte right. This version was shot when black and white film making was at its best, and Fox was known as the best as at noir gothic with velvety blacks and really crisp lighting and shading. One thing that helps this film be better is that it has the best script by Huxley, Stevenson, and Houseman. The script transitions well, and it really captures the major emotional elements of the story. This version also has the best child Jane, Peggy Ann Gardner. I agree with many that Zella Clark, Jane in the 1983 miniseries, is probably the definitive Jane, but Joan Fontaine is equally fine, and many people will simply not sit through the slow miniseries. Joan Fontaine was not a glossy beauty, and she was usually cast as plain Jane despite her natural loveliness. She has a real sense of refined restraint that seems very natural, and her strength is not so much in knowing strong but overcoming her weakness. That is a very important mental, emotional component for getting Jane right. Orson Welles is beefy and sexy. This is before he ate Burger King. And he plays every note of Rochester perfectly. If he is a bit too young for the role, that is the only flaw. While I feel that Syrian Hines, the 1997 film version, is the best Rochester, Wells' performance equals him. Once again, the striking dark-haired beauty Blanche was cast as with a platinum blonde. She's undeniably in great striking beauty, and this is the best of the Blanche. Easy to see why men like her and why women don't. Little Margaret O'Brien, who I usually find cloying and hammy, is of course the perfect Adele. So we have the best Adele too. She is absolutely convincingly the daughter of a diva, a dancer, and a coquette. And her look at me peskiness is just right for Adele. The supporting roles just simply nail the characters as described in the book. Brookhurst Agnes Moorhead as the aunt. Oh, Agnes Moorhead is the aunt. She is not the blondie. Okay, Mrs. Fairfax and young Elizabeth Taylor as young Jane's friend all add up to make this a masterpiece. I forgot to put Elizabeth Taylor in there. Oh, Adrian has Jane Eyre on DVD. Cool. How could I forget Elizabeth Taylor? I didn't even recognize her as a young girl. Elizabeth Taylor. There, I fixed it. I forgot to put the recording date and the location on here. Hotel North Beach. Yeah, I'm in the Fleabag Hotel doing another review with Adrian in the chat room. Can't get him any better than that. Right, more like this. Jane Eyre, Jane Eyre, Jane Eyre, and Wuthering Heights, which I've seen a thousand million times. Orson Welles did enough work behind the scenes that the production company offered him a producer credit, which he turned down. Welles' official reason for this is a belief that a person who is not directing a movie shouldn't be just a producer. The influence of Welles is very clear with various actors from his company: Agnes Moorhead, Erskine Sanford, Edith Barrett playing supporting roles, and Bernard Herrmann, who Welles had introduced to films, composing the music. However, Welles had nothing to do with the employment of John Houseman, his former producing partner and arch enemy, as one of the screenwriters on the film. What Welles did not mention in interviews was the widespread rumor that he had directed a few scenes, but there are a few very striking moments which are stylistically at odds with the rest of the film, which suggest his presence behind the camera. The very first scene in the film, and later the scene which introduces Welles to the film in the role of Rochester. The text of Jane Eyre, Chapter 1, that appears on screen does not correspond to the text of Bronte's novel, Chapter 1. Actually opens, there is no possibility of taking a walk that day. We had been wandering, indeed, in the leafless shrubbery an hour in the morning, but since dinner, Mrs. Reed, when there was no company, dined early. The cold winter wind had brought with it clouds so somber and a rain so penetrating that further outdoor exercise was now out of the question. These are some of the first lines. Jane Eyre narrating, "Hello, my name is Jane Eyre. I was born in 1820, a harsh time of change in England. Money and position seemed all that mattered. Charity was a cold and disagreeable word. Religion too often wore a mask of bigotry and cruelty. There was no proper place for the poor or the unfortunate. I had no father or mother, brother or sister. As a child, I lived with my aunt, Mrs. Reed of Gateshead Hall. I do not remember that she ever spoke one kind word to me." There was an Italian version of the film on DVD distributed by DNA SRL, Jane Eyre 1943, plus Letter from an Unknown Woman 1948 double bill. Two films on a single DVD, re-edited with the contribution of film historian Ricardo Cousin. This version is also available for streaming on some platforms. A release date, April 7, 1944 in the US, country of origin US. Official site, arabolaku.com. Language English, also known as Alma Rebeldi. Filming location, Stage 2, 20th Century Fox Studios. 10201 Pico Boulevard, Century City, Los Angeles, California, USA. Production company 20th Century Fox. Budget of $1.705 million. And no box office statistics. So we just have the rentals from and the number of ticket emissions in France. We don't know if this movie made profit or not based on the limited information provided. Runtime 1 hour 37 minutes, 97 minutes. It's in glorious black and white. The aspect ratio is 1.37 to 1. And let's go down the list. Number 1 is Tips to Encounter the Homeless, 2021. Then we've got Toys Are Not for Children, 1972. Number 2. And number 3 is Shoot to Kill, 1947. So those are the next 2 coming down the pike. Next 3, I mean. I'll try to get them all in this weekend. As a matter of fact, I'll watch and review Tips to Encounter the Homeless right now. And that's the end of my review. Laters.